Excalibur has been Warframe's poster boy since day one, but he's also been struggling to keep up with the meta for years now. However, those times are over, because with the new update, well, let's just say Excalibur mains are eating good right now. So, in today's guide, we're gonna take a look at the new Excalibur with 2 updated builds. Big shout out to all our generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, well, let's jump right into it. Now, usually the first thing I would do in this video is go over his passive and all his abilities. However, the thing is, I already did that in my past Excalibur build, and let's be fair, I think the overwhelming majority of us knows what our poster boy can do in the first place, so I don't want to beat a dead horse and go over the entire thing again. The only thing I do want to quickly talk about though is of course his 4th ability, Exalted Blade, which not only is going to be the focus of today's build, but also the ability that got the buff from the last update. Now, first of all, what Exalted Blade does is relatively simple. It is an exalted sword, you pull it out, it's an energy blade, you deal damage to enemies with it, but the nice treat here is that it also shoots out energy waves, meaning it does have somewhat of a ranged capability and you're not limited to just your melee range alone. And this is also where the first buff comes in, because where previously only direct hits with the blade increase your melee combo counter, going forward, also if those energy waves hit enemies, this too now will count as a melee hit and increase your combo counter as well, making it much more convenient to get to that sweet 12x as fast as possible. However, when we're talking about Exalted Blade, then of course we need to talk about the augment mod called Chromatic Blade, because this is basically a must on every Exalted Blade build. What it does is, it changes the damage type of Exalted Blade from the standard impact puncture slash that it used to have into pure elemental damage, and it also gives you a massive status chance boost, scaling with your ability strength. This elemental damage that you get depends on your Excalibur's energy color. You're either gonna have full cold, toxin, electricity, or heat damage. That is something to keep in mind. And before we go into the builds right now, there is one, I think, relatively important topic that we have to go over first, and that would be Excalibur's survivability. See, when it comes to keeping him alive, there are basically 3 options we have. Option number 1 is going for shield gating with a combination of your first ability and the temporary invincibility that it gives you. I know there are quite some players out there who like this approach, but I personally find that this is relatively stressful to play, and if the only thing you rely on is your first ability plus shield gating, this can end in disaster relatively quickly, therefore not necessarily the most recommended approach in my opinion. Option number 2 would be the classical approach, going for health tanking by investing a lot into health, armor, and adaptation, any sort of damage reduction we can get a hold of. And I would say at base level Steel Path, this is enough to get by, but as soon as you go into, let's say, Deviri Circuit, maybe Deep Archimedia, where the enemy levels tend to be even a bit higher, then also health tanking becomes a bit of an issue because Excalibur himself doesn't have any damage reduction ability. And survival option number 3 would be invisibility by using Side 09 skill Evade as a Helminth Subzoom. I think this is overall the most convenient way to play, especially when you want to go into higher levels, and also the main focus of today's build, although I'm also going to show you a build for health tanking a bit later in the video. And as always, if you could maybe leave a like for the video, that would be super amazing because it always helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm. So cheers so much for your support. Alright, so today I have 2 updated Excalibur builds prepared for you. One is the aforementioned invisibility build, where we use Side 09's Evade as a Helminth Subzoom to constantly stay invisible and therefore not have to worry about our survivability. And the other one is focused on health tanking, giving you a lot of health, armor, and damage reduction, in case that is the approach that you prefer. But let's talk about the invisibility build first. But alright. Let's take a look at how this build works in practice, and luckily this is actually really darn simple. First of all, once the mission starts, we use our Evade to become invisible. Then, ideally, we use a relatively strong gun to get the headshot kills to keep up the duration on Evade, because that is unfortunately a bit difficult to do with your Exalted Blade. And then you just swap into your Exalted Blade and start hacking away. The entire room will simply melt. But okay, Let's go over the build, starting out with the Archon shards, where I personally used 3 blue ones to increase the maximum energy. This way we don't have to use a flow mod on the build, which is nice because this build is going to be very packed. And then the other 2 Archon shard slots are relatively open. You can go for whatever you like, maybe more ability strength or duration with the red ones, or if you want to go into some sort of corrosive, green Archon shards increasing the stacks of corrosive that you can get are naturally also always an option. As I stated, we go for Evade from side 09 as our Helminth ability. I put this over our 3 because I didn't plan to use this on this build. Since Evade has a relatively short duration, the first thing we want to make sure is go for ability duration to make up for this, which is why I went for Narrow-Minded as well as Primed Continuity. Up next, we want to have as much power strength as physically possible, because not only does that mean that our Exalted Blade deals more damage, but also the status chance buff from Chromatic Blade scales with our ability strength, meaning with high strengths, we're gonna have some absolutely mental status chance on this blade. We go for Growing Power in the Aura, Power Drift in the Exilus, although you can swap this out if you like, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, Mold Augmented, Arcane Crepuscular, which gives us ability strength and more crit damage whenever we are invisible, so that synergizes nicely with Side 09's Evade, and finally I also went for Augur's Secrets. Now, that is of course a whole lot of ability strength, and it might be a bit overkill, so don't feel forced to go that much into it as I did. But if I'm not mistaken, then once all the buffs are active, we should have almost 500% ability strength, meaning around plus 1500% status chance on our Chromatic Blade. Yes, that is pretty crazy. This right here then would be a screenshot of the full build. We use Equilibrium to fix our energy issues, and then of course Chromatic Blade as an augment. But what's probably even more important than Excalibur's build here would be the setup on our Exalted Blade that we use with this build. Now, with Exalted Blade on such a high status chance build, we basically have multiple options what we can go into. First of all, and probably to nobody's surprise, we go for melee influence. On such a high status chance build, this arcane is absolutely mandatory and elevates Exalted Blade to not only the next level, but probably the level afterwards. And given the fact that we go for melee influence, we basically have multiple options. Either we could mod it for electricity and blast. This is very strong because it means we will deal a lot of blast status effects due to the high status chance. But if you don't like blast, you could also go for electricity plus gas. This too, on high status chance, is very powerful. However, I was actually surprised to find that my personal preference here is to just go for pure electricity, because with melee influence and all the massive amounts of status chance that we have here, pure electricity is more than enough to clear the entire room in a split second. This right here would be my pure electricity build. I don't think there are any surprises here. However, just to give an addition here, if you don't like melee influence and you don't like damage over time, but you rather want to have a more traditional Exalted Blade, dealing as much direct damage as possible, then why don't you try out this build here? This is a very powerful pure corrosive build using only yellow crits and melee duplicate, and even though this one can't clear entire rooms like the melee influence one, it is not only good at clearing normal enemies, but specifically those big tanky ones like acolytes, like necromechs. Against those big targets, this direct damage build is much more powerful than the melee influence one. But I am also aware that not every player likes this invisibility playstyle with Evade, and that it has some weaknesses against acolytes or other situations where your abilities get disabled. So up next, let's talk about the tanking build. Okay, the tank build. First of all, I would recommend running the tank build on your Excalibur Umbra and the previous build on the normal Excalibur, because for the tank build, you like to have a lot of Umbra polarities. However, for the previous one, those polarities would be in the way, therefore it is recommended to have 2 different Excaliburs for this. Now, to keep your Umbra as tanky as possible, we go for triple Umbral with Umbral Intensify, Umbral Fiber, as well as Umbral Vitality. This will give us a very nice boost not only for our health, but also for our armor, and the ability strength is also not too shabby. Then we combine that with Adaptation for the additional damage reduction, plus Arcane Reaper, which not only gives us additional armor, but also enables us to have constant self-heal, which is definitely needed because Excalibur unfortunately does not have any ability to heal himself. Finally, I also subsumed Mirage's Eclipse as a helmet ability because this gives us another layer of 75% damage reduction, which I think is not necessarily needed at base level Steel Path, but as I also initially said when we talked about survivability, once you get into those higher level activities, you will be happy that you have it. This right here then would be the full build, focusing on a healthy mix of strength and duration. As for your Exalted Blade, of course, all the previous builds that I showed you also work here. Now, these would be my 2 updated Excalibur builds. However, you might be wondering, why didn't I use Wrathful Advance from Kullervo as a helmet ability? I mean, the crit chance bonus that it provides is absolutely mental. The thing here is that, yes, the crit chance bonus is really good, but if we use Wrathful Advance as a helmet skill, that means we're not able to go for the invisibility on the first build, and it also means we don't get the additional damage reduction from Mirage's Eclipse on the second. And while at base level Steel Path, you might be able to get away without these and still use Wrathful Advance, the thing is, all the added extra damage that Wrathful Advance gives you is kinda overkill for base level Steel Path. You only need these amounts of damage if you go into very high enemy levels. And then again, if you go for Wrathful Advance and don't have those defensive abilities, you're probably not even gonna survive until you reach these high levels. Therefore, even though we all love big red damage numbers, I right now unfortunately don't see an Excalibur build using Wrathful Advance comfortable to play and consistently survivable even in high enemy levels. And let's be real here, especially with melee influence, you really don't need that extra damage. The entire room dies in like 1 hit anyway. Now, let's quickly also talk companions, where there are basically 2 preferred options for me here. Either we go for the Pantavel Pafila, who gives us viral priming, making the enemies much weaker to our damage, and on the other side we have of course Nautilus, grouping up the enemies nicely, which probably would be my preferred companion if I went for a blast build. Just keep in mind that no matter which companion you use, you want to make sure to use Synth Deconstruct in order to fuel your energy economy through Equilibrium. Without Synth Deconstruct, chances are you don't get enough drops to keep the whole show running. And if you also want to see a build on the brand new Warframe Temple, then you can find that right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demonoid Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Hoke Hunter, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.